My name is Sarah Toa. I am the Curriculum Director at the American School of Dubai. And we have Jean Che here, who is the elementary principal. We've got Michael McMillan, who is the middle school principal. And then we've got Rochelle Savoy, who is our teaching and learning coordinator in the middle school. And of course, Susan Butler, who is our associate principal as well. So we're kind of almost matching you one for one. So we have a one-on-one session. So today really we're just here to talk about MAP growth. I'm going to kind of start off and we're going to get you to just write down some ideas and suggestions about what you want to know, and we're going to just really attempt to answer some questions and to talk about the MAP growth report here today. Okay, so always starting, we are so lucky at as a school that we always get to think about our mission, and we really are a mission-driven school. So if you look in the middle there, these are the things that we talk about as a leadership team all of the time. We always talk about students, we talk about what we think is best for students, we look at the research. And so using the MAP data and the MAP reports to look at for our student growth is something that we really believe is truly important. We do it because we're required to, but also because we believe it really gives us good information. So when we're thinking about each student, that's what we're doing. The teachers look at each student. We look at the MAP as a whole to think about how we can move our school forward, about how are we doing with our programs. And then so this really helps guide us in who we are as a school. So we really truly believe in our mission as a school. So today what we're doing is really talking about, I'm going to start with an overview of MAP. If you've been here before, how many of you are third grade parents? Third grade. So you're all new, so you don't know much about MAP before, you haven't had experience with it. Oh good, okay. So really this overview of what the MAP is will tell you how we use the MAP and what it is. And in the second part, what I need, if you're a high school parent, when is a time in high school where the students have what I need time, and they just use that time for whatever they need. So I've kind of put in when time, whatever you need to know about the MAP, what questions you need to answer, or what you want to know further about, or any dialogue that we can have about that today. So we have some win time around that as well. Any questions about our focus for today? So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a check-in, and this is a KWL. We often do this with our students. A KWL chart is when we're thinking about a unit of study, we get the kids to write down what they know about something, what they wonder or what they want to learn, and then as we go through the unit we think about what they've learned. So the L is what we've learned at the end. So we want you today to just spend some time right at the beginning to write a W and a K, what you know about MAP and what you want to know or what you're wondering. So if you can get post-its, on a post-it, on one post-it write a K and one post-it write a W.
Because we're gonna organize them, so if you give us that K and the W, that's gonna help us organize them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so on the K post-it, just write something you know about MAP. What's something that you know? And on the W post-it, what's something that you're wondering about, or a question that you have, something that you want to know today? So this is the overview of MAP. So really, the different things about MAP is it's adaptive. It will change over time. So this is like the chameleon, it just goes on and on. There is no time to this test, it will keep on going. And as the children move through this test, it's adaptive, just like this chameleon. So it will, as the questions get easier or harder, the test changes. So it's not like an SAT where it's one test and you get given the test sheet and all the kids answer the same thing. Every child starts on a different test page, and then it will change according to them. So they can sit side by side in a room and the children don't have the same questions. It's a clever test and it's adaptive. A lot of our assessments coming out now are adaptive, so it means it's meeting the needs of the student rather than just a one-size-fits-all. We do MAP from grades 3 to grades 8, and we do it in the fall and the spring. So we do it twice a year, and we do it for those reasons, just because we want to see where the children are at according to the standards and what we're teaching them. But we also want to see growth over time, and we know that it goes up and down. We'll talk more about that. But we want to see 2 pinpoints of data, and then we also want to see data from year to year. So with your children, if they're in 3rd grade, we'll want to look at their MAP data in spring this year and then spring next year to see how they're growing over time as well. We do it in 3 areas. We do the math, reading and science. So this is just what we're what the KHDA asks us to do, but also it gives us great information about what we're finding out about the students. It's not a timed test, which is a good thing, because often time tests can make students a little anxious. It is a test where we just say it's about 50 minutes, but we give them as long as they need. There is in the MAP assessment, there is a little sloth. If they're rapid guessing or if they're going too fast, a little sloth will come up on the screen and freeze the screen and say to them, slow down. You don't need to rapid guess. So it does measure if they're guessing too quickly as well. So we do make sure that the students have ample time to take the test. And the things that it measures is their growth, how are they growing over time, and then are they achieving the standards, how are they measuring against the standards. And it really gives us a complete picture of their learning as well, helps to give that complete picture. The MAP, we use the norms from NWEA, and the students that take the MAP are all over the world. It's an international test. The norms are taken from the 14% of the US population, and it's taken through all the US districts, private schools, foundations. In the UAE, in Dubai, all US schools are required to use the MAP. So all the schools around here use the MAP. We don't get the data from other schools in our area. Only the KHDA gets that. So we are not able to access that data. But 85% of the US state schools, which we are, use it as well.
Can I ask questions, or is it leaving questions on?
Sure. Yeah.
Does the KHDA, I know they don't give you that data, but you know how they come up with that, they rank the schools, is it in there at the end of the year?
This is not part of that rating.
Okay.
The rating is a different part of this. Yeah, good question.
What data from, I guess, do we receive data, or is it kind of coupled in the data of the U.S. State Department schools, the mission schools?
No, we don't get that either. What we get is the 8 million students, the norms. So what MAP does, they take that normative data of the huge body of student evidence over time, and they change the norms about every 4 or 5 years. The last time they changed the norms was in 2020, and they look at all that data over time, and then they say, here's where a student after this many weeks of instruction at 3rd grade with this age, here's about where they might be. And so that's what they give us. So that's how we measure against those norms. But we do have some, this is our next part. So this is actually from, not from last year, but from the year before. The reason we don't have last year's is just things that are happening in our region at the moment. We were unable to get this data. It was due a couple of weeks ago, and we haven't been able to get this data yet. But the NISA schools are schools in our region that are that are very similar to our sort of schools. And so this was what we were like 2 years ago compared to NISA schools. Because I know that we like to be competitive. We like to know where we're at with different schools as well. So we're competitive with the schools in our region that given this information to NISA. So NISA collects this, and then they share it with us.
What schools comprise in NISA? Like, is
If you go on the NISA website, you can see the schools that are on there. Yes, for sure.
This is an independent council, it's not the one that's the regions that the U.S. State Department.
It's independent. There's a lot of US schools in here. So when we're thinking about the map is sort of a snapshot of where we're at. So when we're thinking about a photo album, when you're looking at one photo, that shows you that snapshot in time. And it's not like a gallery where you see a whole body of work. You don't see all of the data. What you're looking at is one picture of your child. And there's a lot of other things that go on 180 days of the year that makes up that whole gallery of work. So that it gives us a really important picture of where your child's at that moment in time. And an example is, this is my dog, Rocket. And this is a snapshot in time of him. He is asleep, and we know that he likes, I know that he likes to sleep, but it doesn't mean that he sleeps all of the time. So it's the same as the map. It gives you that one snapshot of where your child's at, and we know that your child's going to change and grow over time. So it's not going to be like that all of the time. And it could be different on a different day, but this is where a snapshot is of that one test in that one time. So when we're looking at this, we're thinking about the students. So when you look at this, I see one child who has a score of 220, 222, and one child that has 218. And I'm thinking, when I'm looking at them, often we like to compare against other students. And we're thinking, how is my child doing against other students? Or how's my child doing against other kids in the class or other kids in school? And so parents we really want to know that our kids are doing okay. But when we're looking at this, and then we see this, we notice other things as well. And this is what the map is about. The map isn't about so much about how's your child doing against all the other students, but how's your child growing? And that's really what we focus a lot on at ASD, is how are we making sure that every child's growing? And if they're not, what are we going to do about it? If we're seeing patterns over time, how do we follow that and make sure that we're helping each child succeed? So we can see that even though the blonde child is not doesn't have a higher score as the girl, we can see that he's grown a lot and that he's really accessed a lot of learning. They've both accessed a lot of learning, but that he's grown a lot just from that fall to spring. Mike, you often really talk about this one really well as well. Anything else that I should add?
I just think, I always have this in my head, like, I don't know if you and your family, I do in my family, we have a family cottage, and we go back every year, all the cousins line up against one of the logs in the cottage and they measure their height, right? And we see some years they grow at different rates. And at that moment at the cottage, we don't say, oh my gosh, Davis, you didn't grow this year. Like, we need to feed you different. We need to do something. We just let it be, because we know that over time, they're going to grow at different intervals. And I think that's important that we also think about our children and their brains like that too, right? Some years they're going to grow and they're going to go, whoa. And some years they're just not, right? They're dealing with different things. Their brain physically isn't developing the same way. And then we have those periods of time where, boom, the brain just develops and we can't even understand, how did you just grow like that? So I think that's always a nice visual to really think about the value we put on this test.
This is, and we'll come more to that as well, explaining that a little more. This is how adaptive tests work. So it would start with the very first question, and your child will come in. So if your child is third grade, they'll say, here's a good question for a third grade child. And so they'll start here. If they get it right, the question gets a little harder. And if they get that one right, the question gets a little harder. And if they get that one wrong, it gets a little easier. And if they get that one wrong, easier, harder. And it just pans out until they have around 50 questions, until they come to the end where it's kind of, they say it's right between about 3 points. So that's how the test works. They have that standard error of 3.
If I understand correctly, you said the questions are different for each student. So it's not the same.
They have, yes. So they might all start
In
with,
one class, they have 50.
yes, yeah, and they've got huge questions. We don't get to see the questions. No, the NWEA will not share any of the questions. So often we get parents writing to us saying, can we know what questions they got wrong? We don't know. There's no way of knowing.
Well, and that just makes it a little bit different than a standardized test in the way traditionally you maybe thought about a standardized test, because it's not, we don't see them, we don't know, and we can't teach to this test because we don't know the questions, right? The bank is so big and the bank is also so well protected that we don't see it. We are teaching to standards, and we are teaching that, and that's what we teach to. This gives us a really good unbiased view of how have you grown, okay? And that's important. It addresses a couple of the things here. Like, can we prepare for it? Is it a standardized test? Well, it's standardized in the way that everybody does it, but it's adaptive, which makes it very, very different, okay? And it's not something that we can buy the map prep kit and get ready for a map score. That's not where we're going.
And I think to add on to that, because we follow the Common Core error standards, the MAP test is based on the Common Core error standards as well. So it means that they are asking, we're answering questions that are about things that our students are learning or are going to learn. And then what happens is the MAP gives out a RIT score, which is an equal scale interval, and it really is how we measure growth. So you would have got a RIT score for your child. It really shows where the child is at compared to it spans out over the, it moves up as we go through the MAP test as they get higher, and there's those 10 points with the standard error of 3 points each time they get a score. And then like that height thing that Mike was talking about, this is what a typical growth chart would look like for a child. And of course we know that, like Mike was talking, when I was measuring my child, I have one of these, and it just goes up and then stagnant and up, and it's all over the place. It doesn't look like that at all for my child. So we know that they grow in different areas. They're not always just growing in height, but they're growing in brain, they're growing in all sorts of different areas as well. So it doesn't mean that they're not growing, it just means they might not be growing in that measure. So this is some terminology that we have from MAP. I think one that's really important is the percentile down the bottom. It's not a percentage, so if you get a percentile for your student, if your child is in the 56th percentile, that means out of, I always have to explain this, out of 100 students, your child is 56th percentile above all the other students.
They did better than 56% of the people on that
Yeah.
assessment.
But
And
didn't
the
get 56
inverse of
out of
that is they didn't do better than the 40%.
Mhm.
Right? So that's where they are. Which is also moving every year, right?
Yes.
Because the whole cohort of 8 million is moving, right? And so some of them are growing, some of them are not. And so they're being compared against that same sort of massive cohort, and there's fluctuation inside that massive cohort. So yes, some years growth, some years not, which is why it's always best to compare against the self. Comparing against others, it doesn't mean anything. It's about you and your own growth, right?
So, sorry, when we get that percentage, percentile, sorry, that percentile is as against the 8 million?
Yes. Well, so what happens is we put into our school, we've had 6 weeks of instruction. So it's all the students that measured during 6 weeks of instruction at that age, at that time. So yeah, so that's the body, that's the norm.
It's a massive sample
yeah.
size.
Massive.
Massive.
size.
Yeah.
And sorry, and then the percentile, so percentile, you're saying this is percentage is percentage of questions, I guess, answered correctly.
No.
Percentile is the other
Right.
way, I guess.
Right, and you get 2 percentiles. You get what their percentile is in achievement. So they scored a 208 on the RIT scale, and so they're a 208, 56% of people scored lower than a 208, and 44% scored higher than a 208. Okay, that's, I understand. And then growth, and you can see difference in that, right? The RIT may be 210 or 208, and puts you at a 44th percentile, but your growth may be great, right? You may be really, really grew.
You won't get growth until the spring. So then
For grade 3 teacher
yeah,
or
for
students,
grade
yeah.
two.
Oh, so you need multiple.
Yeah,
okay,
because
and
it's
then-
UVU.
And then after that, that growth rate is always in there and successive.
Yeah.
So it goes fourth, fifth, sixth.
Twice a year, yeah.
So is it almost like the 50% is average, and then everything from there, like standard deviation kind of thing?
There's a standard deviation, but the 50%, we can't tell what the average is because it's the whole cohort who's moving, right? So the whole, that just gives you an idea of where they are versus a large sample.
I know
But
it's
we
been-
wouldn't say that 50 is like the average because it could be an unaverage year of growth for everybody.
But usually on the things, don't they have like the dark area? And I know this is simplifying, they have the dark area, and as long
Yeah.
as you fall in there, you're doing about.
So we would
normal.
put that probably at the 20th percentile, 25th percentile. Something below the 20th or 25th percentile will start to raise some flags for us,
Yeah.
right? What's going on here? Performance or growth? And growth sometimes, wasn't a big growth year, but overall we're seeing. But yeah, if we were continually below the 20th percentile, then we would, what's going on?
This next slide is really interesting because this is one that we talk about a lot. At ASD, we teach a very well-rounded curriculum. So in language arts, we think about those 4 areas that we're teaching. In math, there's a lot of math practices that we're teaching into students. In the science, we're teaching a lot of thinking as well. But with the MAC test, this is what it measures. So if you're not seeing growth in some of these things, it might be because they're growing in other areas. Just like when your child, when you don't see growth physically in your child, it doesn't mean that they're not growing. It might mean they're growing in other ways, in their brain or in other ways. So this is what the MAC measures. And of course it can't, in reading, it's a very small, we get our kids to think and talk about text all the time. In 3rd grade, they'll have book clubs and they'll be talking about text and talking about themes and talking to each other about what's going on in reading and having a lot of comprehension skills. And it's not just reading text, answering questions. That's not how we teach reading so much. We do a lot of thinking and talking and deep thinking about text. So sometimes Matt might not measure that. We know it gives us a really good pinpoint of some things, and we can use it to triangulate that data and to think about what else they might need to know. So when we think of MAP, this is how, as a school, we think about. We get MAP twice a year, but we also look at their learner development and their social habits. The teachers are observing every single day. They're getting those assessments every day. We've got 180 days per year where the teachers are also doing other assessments as well, and they're assessing in different ways. So the MAP is valuable information. It's not the only piece of information that we're thinking about. So it does give us a lot of information to go on. The teachers sit down and look at it. The way that they use it, they sit down and look at the MAP test. We have data dive days on Wednesday afternoons, where as a school the teachers sit down and they look at data. And usually we look at data when we've got 2 or 3 pieces of data. So we might look at the MAP and some reading data and reading assessments, or we might look at other things as well, the CAT 4 that comes up, that is coming up this month. And we're just thinking about, where is this child? Is what we're seeing a trend? Is that something that we need to notice? Is it something that we want to monitor, or something that we want to really talk about now? We also, as a leadership team, we look at the MAP data and think about, how is this for our school? Are we heading in the right directions? Are there things that we need to change? So we use this data a lot to just really think about where we're at as with the individual students and as a school as well. We look at designing our curriculum using assessments, not just MAP, but all assessments, and thinking about where our students are at and what they need to know. Any questions so far about that? Okay, so the next part, Mike, we had, and Jean, we had the 4 corners. but I'm not sure, is that something that we want to, how would you like to move?
Kind of working on it right here, right now.
Mhm.
Being responsive to the group in the room. So what we'd like to do, so you know, often when we have these talks, I felt that they're very didactic in that I stand here or we stand here and we talk to you. And what we know about learning is that learning is a social construct. It's not actually something you sit and get. So we want to be a little more constructivist in our approach today. So we came up with an idea to do corners, but we don't have that many people, so we're going to stick to tables. And what we did was we want to take your wonders and put them back to you and use your own collective intelligence to figure out, well, what is it? And using some of the information that we shared with you now. So we have two general sections of wonders that we came up with. If I just move this over a bit and see how we thematically took what you knew and what you were wondering. And we'll come back to the no, although we talked about one of them already, really, here. And we talked a little bit about the comparison and the rating and how that works, but we can dive a little deeper if we need to. But in terms of wondering, we really had three big wonderings. One was around logistics of what and when. And so I'm going to have your table first discuss these three questions and just make sure that you have good understanding of what and when. How do we assess? So what does the MAP assessment assess? We've covered it a little bit. You have some collective knowledge at your table. We're going to give you a couple of minutes, just short minutes to talk about that. Again, talk about when do we assess students, okay? And then I'd like also your thoughts. How often do you feel we should assess? If once you know what we do and you're secure, oh yeah, this is when we do it, and this month and that month, and how many times, what do you think? Should we do more? Should we do less? What do you think? We'd just like to hear your voice. While I set you free to this one, I'm going to come up with the questions for how do we use the data? Okay, because there's more questions on that. And so I'll come up with 2 or 3 guiding questions that you'll, when we finish with this one, I'll share those questions for you. Okay? And then I'll cover this one simply after. It's a wondering that we don't need to spend a ton of time on around admissions. All right, if I can have your attention, we'll move on to the next one. Okay? And so what was gathered here was kind of how do we use the data? Like, what do you do once you get it? What do I do from a lens of my own student, from my own child? So I put it in the lens of all our learners, because as a community, we are, considering all of our learners in the building, okay? So how do we know if learners are progressing? I'm going to ask you to talk about that at your table. How do you know if the learner is actually progressing? What are the data points you look at when you get that report? How do you interpret that? And how do you think, oh, this is good, or this is not good, or what is it? So I'd like you to talk about that. Second one here, what should be done if we notice a student is not progressing? So what do you think we should do? Okay, and we as a collective, as a community, you as a parent, us as a school, us as a team of teachers, what do we do? Do we put the sirens on and like, oh my gosh, it's, or what do we do, okay? And last one is just a connection to that is, so if we do notice that, well, what do we focus on? Okay? And I'm just going to address that question, if you will. Ask, like, is there somewhere we could actually get some things that they could prepare for the MAP test? And I use a metaphor, a comparison, like if you use lifts when you were getting, yourself measured against the wood at the cottage. I'm this tall. And so then everyone says, oh great, look, Mike, you're that tall. And then I treat Mike like he's that tall all the time. And Mike's not actually that tall. And so I'm missing what I actually need to know about Mike, which is he's really this tall. And so we just want accurate data of how are they learning, because then we can do something with that data, right? It informs what our next steps are. So we don't want to prep, map test, this is going to get me into Harvard. No, it's not, okay? It's going to help us plan. So actually I'll give 4 minutes on the clock for this one because it's a little deeper. How do we know if they're progressing? What should be done if we notice that a student isn't progressing? And if they're not, what should we focus on? 4 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, shall we come back and kind of just go through so we can make sure that this room leaves understanding these questions? So when it comes to our wonders about what does it assess, who could summarize that nicely for us in terms of what does it assess?
4 subjects. Science.
Yeah, math, science, some reading, and does it assess everything that we do in this school in terms of those things?
No.
No? So what would be a fair word to use to describe what it does in terms of those core subjects?
Maybe concept attainment, or for the like aptitude, it's more attainment, like, you know, how much knowledge do you have in the concepts of math or science, I think, specifically.
Yeah? Okay.
Retention.
Yeah.
Retention, yeah?
We can have a question. Is grammar included in reading?
No. There is a different test. It's a language usage test, and we choose not to do it. And that could connect. Does anyone want to add anything to that? No? I'm going to park that for how often, okay? Does that connect? So when do we assess students? Do we have clarity around when?
October and May.
Yep, okay. And we have discussions internally, okay, between myself and Jean, myself and Sarah, Rochelle, in terms of when do we do it, okay, and how late we want to go and how early we want to go. I'll tell you, my philosophy is that I want to get at it early enough in the year so that we can use it, right? And there are other thoughts, and they're credible as well, to say, well, maybe we should teach them for a little longer because that might impact how they, and that's valid, okay? And the way I like to use it is I just want to know where they are now, because then I can respond. And then yes, I want to do it again in a latter part of the year, but I also want to make sure there's enough time to do something with it, okay? So that I just don't get it on May 30th and we're done school on June 9th and we say, hey, thank you very much, you didn't grow, and we'll see you again next year, right? I want to have some time for an intervention, so we've got to think of an intervention cycle being at least 6 weeks, so thinking, okay, we need a little bit of time to do something, okay? So twice a year, some schools go 3, okay? Some schools go sort of that beginning of the year, the middle, somewhere in January, and then again. Did you have thoughts on that?
I was about to suggest that I think that really good idea if you can have it with like
Yeah.
during the period, yeah.
And I think I heard an opposing view at this table? Yeah?
We were happy to.
Yeah? And why? What was your thinking there?
There's other ways that the teachers assess the students to kind of get everything, because on that list of this is what it's testing for, but what about all the other stuff?
As I understand, it's very general, it's not like really specific and detailed, so maybe 2 times would be enough to show that growth. So
Yeah.
it's not that detailed that you understand. you know,
Exactly.
like-
I could share a little bit about similarities and differences. So similarities is we both believe that the MAP test, right, some sort of external assessment is valuable. Where we differ slightly is what to do with it and why we do it, right? So I completely understand Mike in middle school in terms of this is the key piece, right, that they use to inform instruction, right? As you may know, in elementary, it's a little bit different. One, we generally don't take multiple choice tests. This is the only time in the year, so you can imagine. And what can be measured on a multiple choice test, we can probably guess what can, and more importantly, what cannot, right? The way we do our assessment, almost from the first week of school, we have something called a cadence, which is screener. Every teacher sits down F&P, which is a little bit different than middle school. So in the structure of elementary, I believe that we have different assessments. This is part of it, right? I don't think you can have a school where you never do an external assessment. We say we're doing a good job, but who else says that? This is one way to measure that. But I guess the elementary feels maybe a little bit differently that this is not needed necessarily on its own to inform instruction. Because we talk to kids, right, grade 1 and 2, they have different assessments, 3, 4, and 5, we do something called F&P, right, which is reading where a teacher is sitting down and really, right, getting fluency information, comprehension, right, how they talk about things, it's a little bit different. So this is part of the assessment kind of package, but it's not the all and end all, and it's not like that in middle school. So because we have that, we probably don't use the map as much because, again, we don't prepare the kids to take another multiple choice test, right? It's a little bit different, right? And we know it changes in middle school and high school. So I'd like to think that we each have what we need, right, to inform instruction. So I can't see a day where we never use this, but how we do it exactly in terms of per child as well as our program is a little bit different. Does that make sense? So I think to answer that question, I think it depends. We talked here, there's a cost for everything. Right, 3 testing days plus 2 makeup days is a lot. 5 days in 182, right?
Yeah.
So that's huge, right? You drop it, you kind of drop everything, and you kind of, right? So if you think about that, we're already giving up kind of 10 days, not for everyone, depending if you finish and you do makeup. So to get up to 15 out of 182 days, it's quite significant, given a lot of different things. So it's a great question. I know a lot of schools that do that winter term, but we do other things, right? We before a math test, we have a pre-assessment, and we use that to change what we're going to do in math. We don't necessarily look at something we did in October to change what we're going to do in this geometry. But they have other implications. Does that make sense in terms of,
Yeah.
we just want to give you that understanding, right, behind the scenes, why we make some of the decisions. We also know if you want the biggest growth, test on the first day of school and the last day, right? Because theoretically, you have the most to gain, right? But also, it may not be that useful that way, right? So we think, what's a reasonable amount of instruction at the beginning of the year? And when they do the comparison, they actually pick the schools that did what we did. They're not going to compare to like first and last day, and they're not going to, the other one would be, you know, one in 1 week and one in the other. You'll see the least growth, but you know what I mean? So we make all those decisions, and it has implications on what we see.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Great, that was excellent. Thanks. I think we're probably good then on the how often. That's great. Okay, how do we know if learners are progressing? What were your thoughts about how you use that decision matrix in your own head to determine whether the learner is progressing or not? What were your thoughts?
I think for our table, I think obviously the percentile against the general population is helpful, and then the growth chart. But then there was probably one other piece of data that would be useful to know to assess whether they're growing, which is how do they do in relation to the population in the same learning environment. So in the school, maybe, or at least in a sample size that's
More relevant.
more relevant, like in our reading, Excel, or whatever it is. But maybe one other piece of data would probably let us know how they're progressing. But probably the biggest item for me, at least, would be the growth. Like, how did you do versus yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts?
What I get is like if it is below 25 percentile or something, that is something we need to like really consider it. Otherwise, like although I will look at like below 40 or 45, but like this is what I get.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that's for achievement, okay? For growth,
It's the projection, right? The projection that is there in the report for.
There is a projection for
Yeah,
next time, right? Yeah, and that's a very sort of standard projection for students. We should see incremental growth on the RIT score. That's what we should see, okay? But know that, right? It's a live, dynamic sample who's also growing, right? It's not a static. So you're not being measured against a static line to say I'm growing. The line is literally changing with that cohort of same age students, right? So you could find yourself in a cohort of really gifted students, right? Which I will say can skew data depending on your size, right? You could have a couple of students in your school who are remarkable human beings, and you'll never be at the top of that, right? And if they leave, then all of a sudden it looks like you grew a whole bunch against the sample size, because the sample size is different, which is why it's dangerous to get this down to a small sample size, right? Because, and I working in a school previous to this one, where our sample grade size was 30 kids, we lost 2. It looked like our data, went into the nosedive, and the board was like, what has happened? Well, we lost so on and so on. That's what happened. And so our data looked like it went down. We just took those 2 students out. So careful, there's that dynamic.
That's why you don't show us.
It's just, if I can, it just doesn't, I don't need to know that. I need to know how you are doing. How are you doing as an individual? How are you growing? Because I care about every student in the school, that they're all growing. And I don't need to know that you are better than you, or you are, I don't need to know that. We're all individuals, we all grow, we all bring a whole bunch of things with us, and over time, we have years where we grow. And we have periods of time where I was going through this whole thing in my life. My parents got divorced, my grandmother died, I had to leave school for 4 weeks to go to a funeral in South America. I came back and, I didn't grow on my MAP test. Like, we have to take all that into consideration, because that's what we deal with on a day-to-day basis in our school, right? That there are other factors sitting behind sometimes. And so over time, we want to see that. But we don't also want to put the siren on for one point.
Can I ask, I know that we have the population of the individual, we have the data on the population. I see what you're saying now. You're saying that too small of a sample size, and it makes sense, I guess, from comparative analysis point of view, because too small of a sample size can give you very skewed results because the outliers will affect that median. So I think that makes sense. But I guess the consensus is, you know, like, maybe not how our kid is doing in the context of this learning environment, but I guess how we're doing as a learning environment compared to other learning environments.
Yeah.
Is there data?
So there's a different assessment. MAP doesn't do that very well.
Yeah.
There's a different international assessment called the ISA that does that. That's what it
Do you
attempts
get
to
data
do.
about, from that 8 million population, do you get data, I guess, broken down into school so that it shows us that, you know, here's of the 8 million, you know, it's grouped into, I don't know, whatever it is, you know, whatever it is, thousands of schools. And of the schools, this is where you guys sit in terms of these grade levels, or does not that breakdown not
That
exist?
MAP doesn't do that. The ISA test does, the International School Assessment. It's connected to PISA, and then that's the point of that assessment, right? This isn't designed for that end in mind. Yeah.
But it does break it down like that was it NESC? The NISA, right? So it does break it down by this region versus it takes the American schools out, right?
So NISA does that.
See, I think,
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah.
okay, see, I think if you can take out, and this is gonna sound horrible, but if you can take out the American schools and
Yeah.
just do it by the international schools, I
Yeah.
think that
That's
probably
more
gives you a better.
And then you know how
Because-
we're,
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, I grew up in the American system, and
Yes.
these numbers are always gonna be on the higher end
Yes.
than the American schools.
We are super fortunate. When you really look at our data, if I could make a big generalization across middle school, 80% of our students are sitting above that
Yeah.
25th, 30th percentile. Most of our kids they are college bound. They are on track, right? That's where we're going. And we have a small percentage who need some support, and a very small percentage who we need to support at heavier levels.
And do you guys show those numbers on that you pull out from the American schools, like in that NISA or?
I don't even know when we get it, because it takes them a while to do
The
it.
data, I mean, we don't get to see anyone else's data, of course, it's confidential, so NISA collects the data and they give us those numbers of anyone that put in the data, so.
But we won't find out until like a year later.
Yeah.
It should be around now for last year, but, you know.
It's also very difficult data to look like, and I'd be wary not using a test like the ISA that's designed for it, because we're a school of 2,000 people, right? So we can go to another school in, let's say, Kuwait, an American school in Kuwait. Well, their ELA, their English language acquisition population, is huge. And so right away, we're different schools. Our admissions process gives us first language English speakers. We're all proficient in English. So you're also comparing apples and oranges often, right? To that school, that context, who are they, what's the ELA population, what's the inclusion plan, do they have a lot of students with learning needs, or do they have none, right, because they don't admit. It's difficult. So that's where ISA, and I'm not suggesting we're going to do that, it's just another assessment. It actually compares you against like schools. So you fill in all that demographic information for your ELA population, your inclusion population, you know, how much is local, international, what those nationalities are. All those demographics get put in, and then you have apples to apples.
Yeah, we noticed for MAP, as Mike was saying, they don't give you a lot of comparison options. National is huge, right? And the next one is probably NISA. You can choose other regions, and at my previous school we did that. We chose the most competitive, but this region, NISA, makes the most sense. But if you scratch underneath what NISA is, we will never know what schools exactly. When we word of mouth, we could say, hey, you guys do it, we have a good sense. But it could be really tiny schools, or it could be massive schools. We don't know. So it's not a very useful, right? I wish I remember hearing this from other schools in another city. You know, our competition were 2 other schools. So we would have wanted to know, and maybe anecdotally they might have shared one-on-one, and we can't. But even that is different because the admissions policies were different. So we test every child unless there's a really, really specific reason why you don't test. We have that. When I remember someone from, I think it was Upper State New York, they want to compare, you know, MAP data, and it's different. I want to also ask, what's your admission policy? What's your student services like? Who is taking the test? That makes all the difference. There are ways for us to get the high score. You could probably guess what they are. Teach the test, have only certain kids, prepare them really, really well, do multiple choice for 3 weeks. That's not our goal. we trust, as Sarah said right from the beginning, we follow the Common Core, and here are our standards. Right? Of course, we try to exceed standards, but at least you meet the standards. And math, it's all pointing to the same thing. So we trust that if we teach really well and deliver our programs, math scores will go up. But even that, I know individual basis, and I think we're here as parents as well. What's up with my child? And I remember, I guess I can personally, I've never shared, so I have 3 kids, I've never shared one math test with them. Because often it actually reflected what I already knew from the teacher. That's the most important thing. You might, it's possible for a child, a really strong child, to maybe not do as well. It's much harder to guess your way up if that's really hard to do. And I remember we actually tried taking a math test one time, and it gets pretty hard pretty quickly. But in terms of what can we actually do about it, as Sarah shared in one of the slides, if it measures only this much, I want to know from the teacher, okay, is this actually reflective of what you see every day? What about this? What about this? And I think that's a richer discussion than how about this math score that was one day, 42 questions in a higher pressure environment, unlike what they do each and every day. Now, if the teacher says, okay, we have this concern and that concern, and math supports that, great, that's the picture you want, not just the math score in isolation. And that's true for both.
So we do want to be focusing on your child and your child's growth. And it is nice as a parent to know, is my child okay? But also, is my child growing from year to year and growing in what we're doing? We do have run out of time. So if you have further questions, if you've got questions about your child and their learning, speak to your teacher, because they're the ones that know them best. They're the ones that see this test, but also see them every single day, and they're doing assessments every single day, and just the way they're observing and the way that they're thinking about your child. And so they're the ones that are seeing them every day. If you have concerns about them, if you have other questions, let us know as well. We love parent questions. We love just communicating with you as parents and having you in here, and just talking about your child's learning and thinking about our mission to talk about each child and their learning. So I really appreciate you coming today, and just if you have questions, please continue to ask them.
Thank you for engaging
Thank
today.
you. For a little bit.